There's a town that lies nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains in the great American state of Pennsylvania. The name of the town is White Ash. With a town charter dating back to 1714, it's one of the oldest towns in the country. And as you can tell from how hard those smokestacks are puffing, it's also one of the coldest. Thankfully, the people of White Ash have a secret that's dark and very deep. A secret to keeping warm, bituminous coal. From bituminous coal as a product ingredient comes heat, power, transportation, and necessities and luxuries almost beyond count. And where, you might ask, does all that coal come from? The answer is places like Alden Mountain and towns just like White Ash, where it's dug from the mountains by the hardest working men in America, our coal miners. But while an industry supports the town supports the industry. Here are two of White Ash's finest young entrepreneurs, Catlin and Kyle, owners of the Double K gas station. Coming or going, they'll get you there. But a town can't be all work and no play. Hello, Alec. Hello, Lillian. Where are you two kids going? Why, they're going to SIF's. Don't let its Nordic theme fool you. The most popular place in every American town is the local diner, and SIF's is no exception. Home to the world-famous Stack Attack, SIF's have been filling the bellies of White Ashians since 1895. Yes, White Ash, founded by men who came from the four corners of the earth, bringing with them innovation, can-do spirit, and dark, dark secrets.
We're back. How's everybody doing? It's a nice way to start a day on your vacation day. Happy Martin Luther King Day. Joining us now on the experience is Matt Hawkins.
Hello. How are you?
Hello, sir. Your hair is amazing, by the way.
Oh, it's one of the reasons why I asked you earlier a second ago if it was video or just audio, because, now that we're all working at home, I needed to take a shower. So I am, my hair, I actually put products in my hair and everything. So this is the best coiffed I've been in a while.
You smell amazing.
Thank you. It's good to see you. I have to say, it's been a year. It was a year ago I did my last convention in, I think it was North Carolina or South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a guy used to doing 2 of those a month. So going from that to literally being at home for the last year has been very weird. It's, I'm adjusting. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Me, I didn't sit still very well. So, I got together with some guys and we started a channel.
Right. No, this is great. I love it. I just want to make sure that, I love the fact that in our comic book industry that the fans are able to talk to the people that end it. It's one of the things I always thought set us aside from regular authors and pros and in other industries was the conventions and the personal contact. Of the people that read my books, I know a lot of them. And there are a lot of people I know on social media that I look forward to seeing at conventions or hearing what they have to say about stuff that they've, people I've known for 25, 30 years. And it's just such a weird time. I been through a lot. I know we've all been through a lot. I feel blessed. My family, my kids are very, healthy, and I'm going to shut this window because the 3 squirrels that make a racket just rolled up on the branch right outside my window there. So, first world problems. But it's just good to see you. It's good to get out and talk to people a little bit. It's been a strange time.
Absolutely. So I'm used to seeing you at a convention. You guys have Top Cow rolls out with the coolest looking booth. What have you guys done with your time? What do you fill that space with for you?
For me, it's a lot of reading and research. I've started watching a lot of TV this last year, which I hadn't done in years prior just because I didn't have a lot of time for it. But, I've worked in TV and written TV before, so it was interesting to get caught up and watch some old shows with new eyes. And it was actually it was good because I've kind of gone back and relearned some of my roots of things I liked and explored some, entertainment options for myself. And I enjoyed it. Kind of, I think one of the things when you're a writer, you have to constantly read and ingest entertainment to constantly be stimulated, and so I need it. I miss it. I miss the interpersonal thing. I really, really do.
I feel you so much. So speak to working in the TV industry.
Well, I worked on the Power Rangers TV show for 2 seasons in 2003 and 4, I think it was. Space Patrol Delta and Magic Rangers. My friend Greg Aronowitz was the showrunner, and he asked me to write just an episode, and I did. And they liked it, so they hired me to write more, and I ended up writing a bunch. So I worked on 2 seasons of that TV. At Top Cow, we've produced the Witchblade anime, the Witchblade live action. We've been involved in a number of other film and television options, which we've produced. Some have gone, come back to us, and some have been developed out. A lot of stuff we've been developing for a really long time. It's an interesting time. Everything's changing. I mean, it's interesting to watch change in real time.
So speak to. I'm always interested in things, learning about things that I have never been exposed to. Like we consume TV, everyone consumes TV, but I'm always wanting to know what's really going on behind the scenes. So what does it involve putting on even just one episode of any given show? What's going on behind the scenes?
Oh, I was mainly on the writing staff, but the interesting thing about the Power Rangers, it was kind of a jigsaw puzzle. All the footage of them with fighting the monsters and in costume was from the Japanese show. So you were given that footage and told to use it, and then you, as the writer of the American show, would have to write the interstitial scenes that connected them all together. And would try to make sense of it. Sometimes it was incredibly easy because the episode translated culturally, and in essence, you were kind of doing a fancy translation job. But sometimes it was incredibly difficult because they had some interesting cultural things that people here would just not understand at all, and even take the wrong way. So. We had to shoot some stuff in the costumes, and it was interesting because towards the end of the season, I think there were 38 or more episodes of the Japanese show, and towards the end of the American season, I think there were fewer episodes, and sometimes they would give you footage from 2 different episodes to make one episode together, and I did that once, and it was interesting.
Like that.
Yeah, there's only, I think the thing with television writing, and the reason why I really like comic book writing and prose writing, which is what I'm trying to do as well, is you're really in more control of the writing process, especially since I'm in independent comics, and I work with Image and Silvestri and these people, and we allow a lot of creative freedom as long as it's cool. I mean, those are sort of our metrics. Is this cool? Is it engaging? Is it entertaining? I mean, all these things sort of factor in.
Were you a fan of Power Rangers ahead of getting the writing job?
No, not really. I never really watched it. I had 2 very young children at that point, and when my friend was given the showrunner job, I knew my kids were fans, and I had asked him if it would be possible. I didn't understand how it worked, so I asked him if it would be possible to bring my kids on set for an hour to check out the people fighting. And then he explained to me how it worked with the Japanese show, and then we ended up catching up and talking about it. And he asked me if I'd be interested in writing just a one-off for a freelance, and I agreed to do it. Did it, and it was a fun experience. There were some that weren't as fun. I think one of the things you don't realize in writing sometimes, especially when you're doing work for hire work when you don't control it, is they might change what you say entirely. They could change all of it, and you're still credited as the writer. I mean, there were episodes, several that I watched, and I kind of scratched my head as to why they made changes. I'm assuming they had whatever reason. They're the ones that are putting the show on. They've been doing it for years, and who am I to question it, really? But there were some creative choices that were made that I always was like, really? It is what it is. I mean, they were not like detrimental to the storyline. They were just sort of, in my opinion, kind of pointless. But I learned a long time ago that if it's semi-pointless, you don't bother fighting on that hill. Just let it go.
There weren't any episodes that you watched and you were credited with you didn't recognize at all anymore.
There were a couple. The one, I got to tell you, there's an episode in Space Patrol Delta called Magic Rangers, and it is weird to be talking about stuff I did 20 years ago, but it's fun nonetheless. But that episode, I think it's episode 18 of Space Patrol Delta, is called Samurai, and it's specifically about the Red Ranger. And for whatever reason, that episode is the only one I wrote that was intact with the story I wrote, almost word for word. I don't know why. I mean, all the other ones were pretty radically changed. Some of them were completely changed, but that specific episode I really liked, and it was about the Red Ranger using the sword. It was fun.
So someone wanted to go back and watch something that was pure Hawkins. That's where they would have to watch that.
Wow. I don't know if Power Rangers is pure. I would call pure me, but you know, it's not. You know, the books that I write that are the most me are the books like honestly Think Tank. You know, I mean, Think Tank is the. I think Think Tank is secretly the guy I wish I was.
Yeah, speak to that. That intrigues me. What about him?
Just that's hard to explain. I'm not sure I would have said this 20 years ago, but just the idea of being able to kind of do anything you want, you know what I mean, within reason, and because you're just so valuable and needed and important. You know, everyone just puts up with your bullshit, you know. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. I know.
I know a girl. I know a girl. You can say it.
Okay. So, but anyway, no, it's really interesting. You know, the creative process, the creator-owned stuff that we do, and a lot of the stuff that we do at Image, at Top Cow specifically, like, you know, Mark Silvestri really loves Cyberforce, Witchblade, The Darkness. He loves Hunter Killer. He loves these things. And you can tell when you talk to him because he cares about these characters. He cares about how they're portrayed. And you can see, and sometimes, you know, you get in arguments creatively about what to do with things or how to do things. But ultimately, he created them. They're his babies. And you kind of go with his gut on some of these things. You know, and I have that privilege on some of my own creator-owned properties, and it is weird sometimes seeing other people write a project that you've only written for like a decade. Like Think Tank, there were a couple people that wrote. There was a one-shot that was written by Rasan Ekadal, and he was my artist, so it was less weird. But it still was weird to read a story that I didn't write about that character that was so personal to me. Do you know what I mean?
I could totally understand that.
So
probably refreshing, right? Like you get to enjoy it as a fan instead of having to feel the pressure of writing original things.
Yeah, I think at some point you have to kind of let go because if you put too much hands on something, you're going to prevent it from growing. I think, you know, like you look at all these comic book characters, there were the people that created them, and then there was the next generation and the generation that added layers to these characters that made them more interesting, more compelling, more human. You know, one of the things I note about a lot of the characters I see from the 60s, 70s, and I don't know if it's a good thing, but all the characters we have today, they're so flawed. They're so dark. It's one of the reasons I kind of enjoy reading some of Cedric's stuff because it's just so hopeful. You know what I mean? I mean, everything written seems so dark these days, and maybe it's a sign of the times.
I think it's true. I see that because I started in the industry in the 90s, and that was the beginning of the dark character with Spawn. And we already had a damaged character in Batman, but people seem to kind of glom onto that. Maybe it was a way for us to work through the things that we were unhappy about in ourselves. We look for that in characters.
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that Silvestri told me when I first started working at Top Cow, and I kind of internalized it, is he said, you know, there's wish fulfillment. I mean, even if the character is a bad person, a kind of a bad person. Jackie Estacado is not. You could say he's a hitman. He's part of the mafia. You could argue he's a bad person or has bad attributes. But you take a character like that and make them interesting and compelling and likable. It changes things. You know, how is Tony Soprano someone that people look up to? You know, I mean, that's kind of weird when you think about it on a meta level. But you creating these characters that are interesting. You know, you look at Breaking Bad. How did you know Walter White's character get evolved and going from a simple family man who was trying to help himself out because he had cancer and he thought he was going to die, to becoming a megalomaniacal kingpin that kills people and manipulates people in drug deals. You know, I mean, that's quite a character arc, but it's so believable. And I think that's one of the things where these characters have to evolve. And I think, and my point on that is that sometimes it takes the next generation or the next writer to come in and push that character. I think sometimes the original creators, I've known there's some characters I've created where I've been afraid to do too much to them because I care for the character. Does that sound stupid? I mean, there are characters I have that I care about a lot, you know, and then there are characters that I work on that are work for hire, or they're, you know, or otherwise, and I care less. It is interesting when you could see the characters that you could talk to creators and you could tell that they really care, versus when they don't. It's very noticeable, at least to me. And that's one of the things I've always liked about Image Comics, actually. And, you know, as we're coming up on the 30th anniversary, which is pretty amazing, you know. I mean, and I've only really ever worked at Image Comics, you know, outside of Image or an Image studio. I worked at Awesome Comics with Rob Liefeld for a year, and that was the sole period of my career, which is 28 years now, that I've not worked for an Image or an Image Comics affiliated company. You know, I've been at Top Cow since April of 1998. It's weird to me when I think about that, because everyone I know has jumped so many jobs in that time period. You know, I know people that have worked at Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, and Valiant. You know what I mean? All four in the time that you know, I've been with Top Cow and Mark Silvestri. So it's different. I don't know why we went down this thought process, but it is fascinating. And I question this all the time as to whether people who have passion for their characters sometimes do them disservice. I think sometimes with characters that I care so much about, like I said, I'm afraid to do too much to them, or I really do think there's something to that. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to veer off onto a weird tangent.
No, tangents are where I live. This is good.
But that's the thing I really like about Image Comics, and one of the reasons why I've always kind of stayed there and gravitated to there, because the people that work on these projects, they do care. You know what I mean? I mean, they really do care, because most of the people that launch creator-owned projects, the vast majority of us, we do it with the knowledge that we may not make any money. Okay, think about that for a second. You know, I mean, and that includes the mid-range of creators. You know, not everything is a hit. You know, and that's why you see so many people that mix, you know, like work for hire work with other kind of stuff. And I've never really done much work for Marvel or DC. I often wonder if I'm one of the few that's kind of achieved this level in the industry that has not. You know, I mean, this is my third decade, and I've worked editorially on projects that Silvestri has done with Marvel and DC, and that Liefeld did. Heroes Reborn. You know, if you go back to Heroes Reborn, I'm pretty sure I'm credited in those books. You know, it's weird sometimes when I go back and look at some of that stuff.
It's probably a little bit of both. I suspect that there are people, the reason why they've moved around is because there might be an expectation in the industry that to prove legitimacy, you have to be able to say that I've worked for Marvel and or DC. Do you think that's a little bit true?
I think that is true. It also depends on, I think there are not a lot of people that are, to me, like Todd McFarlane, you know, Mark Silvestri, Rob Liefeld, myself. I'm not comparing myself to them because they're Image founder artists. But the point being is that we straddle the creative and the business. You know, if you actually look at the number of us in the industry, it's not as big as you think. You know, I mean, I would bet it's under 100, you know, and that includes people like Brian Polito and, you know, and people like that, and Billy Tucci, these guys who are sort of, you know, they have their sort of exclusive online audiences at this point, and they don't care about some of these other distribution outlets, so which is fascinating to me, you know, that people have sort of this with crowdfunding and all these various things. Everything is changing. I mean, it's scary, but it's also exhilarating.
Yeah, I think we can look at it right now as, you know, this is a big change for the industry, but if you look at all the changes that it's gone through over the years, I mean, you might have looked at the move that Image made coming out of Marvel as being a ridiculous move, but I cannot imagine a comic book industry without that move now. It was so important to what happened afterward.
It really was. I mean, you know, and I wasn't there for the very beginning of it, but I was there pretty soon after. I mean, I started in April of 1993, and I don't know how much I beat those guys in terms of being in those offices, being in that early thing, but it was fascinating to be there for early Image. And when I was at Extreme Studios in Anaheim, the Image Comics office, the corporate office, was right next to it in the same floor. So, and it was completely different. I don't think there are any staff that work there now that work at Image now that worked there back then, because Eric Stevenson was at Extreme with me and Rob Liefeld. We both were at Extreme Studios back in the early days. It is interesting. I think Rob honestly does not get enough credit for the innovations that he's done and the people that he brought into the industry, because it's a lot of people. I mean, it's whether you like Rob Liefeld or not, he brought in an entire group of people, and him and McFarlane and Silvestri, these guys, they revolutionized the industry with computer coloring on these books. I mean, go back and look at the books in the late 80s, and they look so much better now. And then McFarlane went, and on top of it, he did it in the toy industry. How cool is that? Look at toys now. They are so much cooler than they were in 1990. And why is that? Because McFarlane Toys pushed the envelope, pushed the standard, and now we have, Mattel and companies producing much higher quality figures. And why? Because one guy decided he wanted to build a company and make toys that he thought would be cool and that he'd want to play with and he'd want to set on his shelf. And that's why. And I think that's the same reason why the Image founders did what they did. They wanted to control their own destinies. They were tired of being told what to do when they knew in their hearts they were right. And these are once in a lifetime things. And I consider it one of my great life privileges to have been there and witnessed it firsthand.
Absolutely. I honestly am still a little bit sad in my heart that they're not called Todd Toys.
That was the original name, wasn't it? He couldn't call it that, I think, because of wasn't it because some Barbie has some character Todd? I don't know. I seem to recall he wanted to call it Todd Toys and had to change it.
I'm sure there are people out there that have Todd Toys still that they've got in the package as
a
mad collectible, and I can remember seeing them.
These things are cool. When I worked with Liefeld, we produced a couple toys. We did Prophet and Rejects and Shaft. We did some Youngblood toys, and then I did Lady Pendragon. I produced a toy in a Chinese factory on my own in 1998 and released it into the industry, and I'm pretty proud of that toy. The character hasn't aged as well, given sort of the change in what's going on in the industry, et cetera, et cetera. But I would redesign the costume. Let's say it looks very 90s.
Whole box of those somewhere, along with the Cybernary and the Web Witch. And
oh yeah, no, you know what was great about those times? I got to tell you, I wish those times would come again. Maybe they are for younger people that are doing web comics and they see the new frontier. There was just an excitement and an enthusiasm and a belief that we could do it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there was this belief that we could do it, and I think. And we just went out and figured out how to do it. And I think that's part of the reason why early Image confuses people, because when Image launched, we were all hired, and none of us, I was hired and put in a very prominent position, and I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I mean, think about that for a second. I was put in a very prominent position at one of the top Extreme Studios, one of the top companies at Image at the time, by itself a top 6 comic book publisher at the time, And I was put in charge of almost all of marketing, editing, and a division. And I was soon then consulted in financial matters, et cetera, et cetera. And it's weird. I have a science degree, I mean, it's my career and my path is just, it's so weird to me. And when I stop and think about it, it's odd. I mean, I don't know that I would change anything. I've had some hard times of late, but it's been good. It's kind of tempered me. I feel like, I'm that sword being tempered that Arnold was talking about in his little speech bagging on Trump the other day.
I've got to talk about the science background, because I'm like, you tell me that you have a science background and then you got hired to do what is clearly not a science position. You have to walk me through how in the world that happened.
I was working at Norwest Financial, which is now a part of Wells Fargo, which is, of course, known for its ethical standards, right? And I was doing skip tracing, some collections, and some crazy stuff. And then eventually we were doing they would have jobs like Levitt's. You go to Levitt's Furniture, right? And you get 12 months, same as cash on your couch. Well, the whole reason why that even exists is because companies like Norwest Financial then grab your information, they supply the credit, and then they try to sell you on stuff. And so that was what I was doing at the time, and I really hated it. And then I switched into when I realized that I couldn't rip people off like that just knowingly. I switched to retail banking, and then I realized just how horrible humanity is. So I had just had one of the most god awful weeks as a teller. Well, I'm going to college full time, and my nephew asked if I would go to the signing at Mile High Comics, and I didn't know who Rob Liefeld was at the time. I didn't know who he was. And so I took my nephew to the signing. We waited in this long line. I got to the front. There were a couple artists that Rob hired that were there, that they got hired right in front of me. I hated my job. Here were these young, good-looking guys. There were some cute girls there with them. I was like, wow, look how cool that is. And so I was the next guy, and I asked Rob if he was looking for anyone for any kind of other job or anything else. And he said he needed someone to write press releases and do letters pages. And is that something I could do? And I lied and said yes. And I'll never forget this. I drove in Anaheim to a place called Crown Books, which I don't know if it exists anymore, but and I went in and found a book on how to write a press release. The book was called How to Write a Press Release. It would have been what would now be Dummy's Guide to Writing a Press Release in that section, And so I bought this book. I took it home, and I thought, I'm like, well, how would I impress this guy? And I had no idea. He was all in the news. I mean, the weird thing was when I started looking into it, he'd been on CNN like 2 weeks earlier. And so I was like, holy shit, this is like a legit thing. This is a big thing. I just waited in a 3-hour line just to meet this guy. And I have his business card. So I wrote a press release as if I was writing a press release to send out for the signing that he did at Mile High. Mm-hmm. And I faxed it to him. I said, this is the press release I would have sent out to the local media, alerting them that your signing was happening. And he hired me that day.
So wait, so he's probably at this point, 18 and you're 20?
Oh, no, he's a couple years older than me. I would have been 21. He would have been 23 because I was in grad school. I wasn't in my undergrad. Yeah, such a different time. I mean, and that's why Think Tank is such a character kind of near and dear to my heart because, that could have been me. I mean, I was never that smart, but I could have been sucked into, like many of my friends, into working at, Northrop Grumman or any of these military industrial complex companies. My dad was an Air Force guy who then worked for Rockwell and Lockheed and was an engineer. So it's kind of a family business,
What were you hoping to do with the science degree?
I wanted to go into applied science and into research. I wanted to do field work. I'm not a guy who wants to see. This is the crazy thing for what I do now. In my mind, I was not the guy who would sit in an office and do research all day, which is in effect what I do now. I sit in my home or at my office and I write comics, and fortunately there's more social aspects to it. But no, I know several people that are pretty high up in that scientific industrial complex. And, I use them as references. If you read the science classes in the back of some of my books, I quote these guys from time to time. And I always send it to them in advance to allow them to approve it, because the last thing I want to do is jeopardize their security clearance, But there are things you can find out. And I think part of the success I've had with my science fiction books that I've written, they all seem very topical, including like The Clock, which came out last year and was about a pandemic before the pandemic hit, and weird timing, And part of that is because these things are discussed in academic science journals, and I subscribe to those and I get them. And they're boring, and 99% of the time you sort of scroll through it, and it's all this, academics trying to impress each other. And then you get to one or two sentences, and they blow your mind, because it's like, like I remember when I wrote a book called, one of the books I wrote has about Golgotha. It's about having a genetic Stairway you have genetic memory in your DNA, meaning there is stuff that's stored in your DNA, and we can use your DNA as a hard drive. This is actually legit science now. I can take and insert information into your body with a needle or whatever, and have it become part of you, and then extract it later. So, of course, my mind, when I read that, thinks of, well, so that's why we're here. Somebody did that 10 billion years ago, and boom, stories. And that's how the creative juices start flowing from one or two sentences in some sort of journal. And I did that with science. I did that with Think Tank, too. I would always get the very leading cutting edge science. It's weird when you look back 10 years later, because it's not cutting edge anymore. You know what I mean? I go back and I reread it, and I'm like, God, it was really cutting edge when it came out. When it was out, it was very cutting edge. And now you read it, it actually feels a little dated, which when I reread it and started thinking about doing a new volume, made me quite sad, actually, because when you write something that's very tech specific, it's hard, Well,
that happens like for, it seems like when we're reading Crichton books, that they were so forward thinking, but almost everything that Crichton addressed has come to pass. Like,
Yeah.
he based it on good science that was like, of course, it makes sense that dinosaurs used to have feathers or became birds.
Right.
And it makes sense. All of his stuff that addresses contagions. And when I read the first issue of Clock, it was like, this is the scariest concept because it could totally happen.
Well, and that's the rub, right? I mean, we always demonize the Nazis, and we should. I'm not pro-Nazi, believe me, but they, eugenics and that concept of it was an American design. I mean, we created eugenics, and the Nazis adopted it and took it and ran with it. We then, after the Nazis adopted it, we abandoned it and we demonized it, so we no longer look at it. But the idea of an American firm using eugenics, that we do it every day. What do you think GMO foods are? That's in effect eugenics among food. And I talk to people all the time that are disbelievers in science, and especially now we have this weird schism in the country, and there are these people that just don't trust science at all. And I have to tell you, most scientists I know are not political. They could not care at all about politics and what's going on. They're of two cloth. They're either ones that are doing it for achievement and they want to do it because they can, or they're doing it to help people. Those are the two types of scientists.
Yeah, but all of them follow the science, right? They're not going to make up data to fit what they wanted it to say. They go, aha, this is telling me the opposite of what I thought was going on. We need to figure out why.
Well, we talk about things which, like, it is my understanding, I don't have any actual proof, and I'm not perpetrating a conspiracy theory. I have no proof. But it has been relayed to me that there are teenage clones alive, that people have been cloned. Because if you look back to Dolly the sheep and when the cloning technology was pioneered, that was almost 20 years ago. Okay, think about that. That was 20 years ago. So it could have easily been used on humans at the time, which means there's people between 18 and 20 walking amongst us that were our clones. You can clone your pet right now. Cost you a couple $100. The interesting thing that scientists can't figure out about that is the clones of pets often come back more aggressive, and they don't know why.
Oh,
They come back not like where they're like demonic, like fanged beasts, but they're just more aggressive. And it's happened many times. They notice it especially among bulls, because you get one of those prize bulls or one of those prize thoroughbreds. Technically it's illegal to clone them, but you don't think people have tried?
Oh yeah, I totally understand that. I have in my earlier life, I totally wanted to do pre-med. So I have an obsession with science also. So we share that. And
it is certainly used for ill. Okay. I mean, I'm not saying we should blindly trust anything, but I will put my faith in science over politicians, and I will put my faith in science over religion, but that's my choice.
Yeah, I've watched, I don't know, maybe you've watched this also. I'm pretty sure it's a Netflix show that was basically talking about genetics and genetic manipulation, about people, kind of like not in the mainstream, in the fringe. They have all the science and all the ability and the degrees and all those things. They're the smarts, but they know that what they're doing is outside of what would be considered the law, and are so doing genetic manipulations to try to see what they can change about the code.
Well,
the benefit of humankind to fix disease.
Well, the CRISPR has changed everything. CRISPR. It's a machine that you can buy. I almost bought one because they are not very expensive. However, if you wanted to, say, acquire jellyfish DNA to slice into your cat so that your cat would glow in the dark, that jellyfish DNA would probably cost you about 10 grand. Yeah. I mean, so you can buy these CRISPR machines so I've seen them used for $600. And the scary part about that is, think about that for a second. For $600, you can buy a machine that you would then take, find someone with COVID-19, right? And start splicing in different types of DNA that you pick up in the wild with COVID-19 just to see what happens. If you're crazy and insane and an extremist, you don't care. You're willing to die, right? Those people are willing to die. So if you create something that causes you to die, then you've probably somewhat achieved your purpose, and it's I really truly don't understand extremists.
I actually want to take this to a crazy other place of We've been writing about superheroes for a long time. This finally makes it kind of feel like, just like the John Crichton books, that concept that there might actually we might be able to manufacture a superhero, kind of like The Boys, doesn't seem so far off. If we can buy for $600 something, we could start messing with genetic code.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, the idea of transhumanism, where you merge man and machine, and the synchronicity and all these things. I mean, all these things have been happening for a while. None of this is new. And the speed that we have in some of these quantum computers, especially when you take 4 or 5 of them and link them together, you take 4 quantum computers and link them together, and you have more processing computer power than the entire world had 10 years ago in 4 machines. Okay, I mean, so when you start thinking about that and the idea of it, and see, I know this scares people, but the idea of putting a chip in your brain that would allow you to in real time access the internet, I would do it in a heartbeat. And I'll tell you why. Because if you no longer have to remember anything, then you can allow your mind and education and everything in terms of analysis and application. Rote memorization, I remember memorizing the entire periodic table. I remember memorizing all of the state capitals. Neither one of those has served me well for anything other than Jeopardy. Okay, so, and I don't, so what's the point in rote memorization? In my opinion, there is none. It would revolutionize education if kids were not taught to memorize, but were given things and allowed. It's why I always liked open book tests, when people would, and it was not, and there were more essays or interpretive. It was like, whether Na is, sodium or salt versus, Ag or silver, these things. I mean, who cares, really? Do you really need to know what the atomic weight of silver is? Do you need to know that you can't look it up on your phone in 2 seconds?
Yeah.
I mean,
wasn't that the same problem that they had when we started having the written word, that they were so terrified that we would lose, everyone did spoken word back then, and everyone passed it down generationally, and they thought it would mean that we would lose something, but then it freed us up to be able to be innovative, to do other things.
I have never thought about that, and you have sparked my curiosity, so I am actually going to look into that, because I've never really thought about how the written word supplanted the spoken word. I realize, the Native American or the First Nation storytellers, how they carried down, and I've heard some of the stories from them on reservations, and that's I have to say that is somewhat magical, and I've been to the Middle East Comic-Con, and I've dealt with a 16-year-old kid of a friend of mine who had memorized the entire Quran, and we reflexively think of them, oh, they're evil, but this is a nice kid, nice family. And the fact that he memorized the entire book fascinated me, and because I realized how many Bible thumping, Sunday attending Christians can quote more than 5 verses.
I think there's people in both for all different religions that have the passion to memorize it all. It's a celebration of what they believe. I love it.
But that's a different thing to me. That memorization is almost like a cultural tradition, in a way, like oral traditions. And given like what's fascinating to me where my mind goes with that is, when we play games like telephone, and you see how the word can change or what was said can change. What was the original message? Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? We don't know. I mean, so how did it start? Did they translate it literally? And is it the same story, or has it evolved? I mean, I don't know if you've told stories about your childhood, but mine have been exaggerated in the years. And I realize that sometimes it's like, wow, the story that I told has become a bit of an exaggeration. And who cares? I'll roll with it. I'm a storyteller anyway, and it's just interesting to me that, and my sisters and I have 2 older sisters, and we often reflect, because we're reasonably close, and the pandemic has brought us closer, and some family tragedies have brought us all a little closer. But, it is fascinating to talk to my sisters about events from our childhood and how differently the 3 of us remember them. Like, we get into arguments about who was even there. You know what I mean? And which is fascinating to me now, because the arguments are very different now, because it's like, oh, remember 10 years ago? Because you get the Facebook reminder. 10 years ago, you and I were in Solvang, and we went and played mini golf there and rode bikes around downtown, And it's like, there's evidence. There's a video, there's a picture. We didn't have that as kids. Mm-hmm. Completely different world, I think, go on and on to my sons about how, you know, we had to walk up hills both ways in the snow backwards to go to school, you know, like was the old joke. But I do tell my sons that something has been lost in this real world time that we have, this real time world, I mean, because if you look at everything, it used to be from, you know, balancing your checkbook, writing a check, there was no immediacy to any of these things. You know, you'd write a check and it might not even hit your account for a week. You know, I mean, that concept is so foreign and weird to my sons that they don't even understand it. You know, I had to explain to my son one day why this 90-year-old woman was writing on a piece of paper at the checkout line and making us wait really long time. You know, I mean, that was 5 or 6 years ago. And honestly, I've not seen one, by the way. I don't know if that's changed or if those people finally have aged out, or I used to still see elderly people. Oh, you know what it is, Jen? I just realized we're the elderly people now. When does that happen, huh? God dang.
It's like it's only a matter of time before you start telling people to get off of our lawns.
Get off my lawn. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I'm having a good time. I enjoy who I work with. I really like working at Image in the studios, and I like working with Elena and Henry and Mark and Vince. It's been a good experience for me.
Any of your family come along into the comic book industry?
My middle sister wrote some comics that Top Cow published called Blood Legacy back in the day, but she was more of a novelist. She wrote a series of novels called Blood Legacy, and she has other work that she's done that's not out yet, that I've been talking to her about some stuff. But yeah, she's definitely a writer. She was like a 30-year retired highway patrol woman. Like I think she retired a sergeant, and so she. My family is really strange. I mean, my middle sister is genius. I mean, she is Mensa level, skipped 2 grades, like ridiculously smart, you know. And she worked for CHP.
You got to be really smart to do what they do.
No, I know, and I talked to her because a lot of her friends are still police, and she's been retired for a few years. But the sad thing, talking to her, is she's like, you know, I don't know why anyone would want to be a cop today.
Yeah, it's a different thing, right? It used to be a position of respect, and you were within the community.
Right.
People went to for help. I mean, you're a little bit annoyed if they pulled them over and gave you a ticket, but it's kind of like it's an impossible place for them now, where because of the actions of some.
Yeah, I mean, there is, you know, I laugh sometimes because I was watching Dave Chappelle's Netflix show. I don't know if you saw that, where everyone always talks about you can't blame people for the bad apples, and he's like, well, then how come we don't have more, you know, bad airline pilots? You know, I just thought it was an interesting comment. I really don't want to veer into politics, but I actually never thought about that. I'm like, because we always want to give the bad apples a break, you know, and I'm like, yeah, I guess if you're a pilot, you know, there are no bad apples, right? You're supposed to be weeded out. Or if you're special forces, or yeah, I mean, if you have a job that's considered important, I think the problem is it's like teachers. None of these people are paid well enough.
No.
You know what I mean, it just makes me so sad when you know, because I've thought about teaching in my lifetime. I'm not very patient, but I think I'd be actually a good college teacher. I think I would be, and because people are there because they want to be. I don't think I'd want to teach people that didn't want to be taught, which to me is K to 12. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
Once you get to college,
they're just biding their time.
Yeah. Well, you know, my experience with education has changed for a couple of reasons because of my 2 sons, who about now are both out of high school, and the work I do with CASA. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I am a court-appointed sanctioned advocate for the Los Angeles children's court system. And what I do is I represent foster children, their educational rights and their housing rights. Some of them get assigned to me, and I work with the courts, and it's all pro bono volunteer work. So I recommend that people who want to try to do something to help the community would take a look at this, because it actually makes a real difference. And you can make serious. I know that I have specifically made real change in a couple teenagers' lives, and that makes me feel good. I mean, I'm not completely altruistic. I do it because it makes me feel good about myself, but it's still ultimately a win for everyone. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I tell people about, it's called CASA. CASA. If you Google Casa Court Kid, whatever, I guarantee you it's a nationwide organization that people go through a 6-month training, then they get assigned children, and they work with these foster kids in the court system. The reason why it's so important here in Los Angeles is we have, I don't know if you know, nationwide, the average social worker has 40 cases. In Los Angeles County, the average social worker has 500 cases. We have 30,000 kids in the foster care system in Los Angeles. And a sad stat, and this is a true stat, and this is the one that really kind of broke my heart, is 1 in 2, so 50% of kids, men, boys, not girls, boys from age 18 to 21 that are aged out of the foster care system in Los Angeles are either one of 3 things: dead, homeless, or in jail. Wow. So think about that. 50% of these kids, 1 in 2 of these boys that are generally raised by the system, they're either homeless, dead, or in jail by the time they're 21. And that's just 3 years. And when you get involved in the system and you start doing it, it really breaks your heart because they can't pay you enough to do it. I mean, I've sat in a courtroom where I saw a 16-year-old girl with a 50-year-old, the father of her 2 children, and she had accidentally murdered the kid by getting high on heroin and passing it to her infant through her breastfeeding. Mm-hmm. She just didn't know it was possible, and there's so much wrong in that when you unpack that. Why is a 16-year-old girl with a 50-year-old guy? Okay, that's first, and the funny thing is when you're in the courts and dealing with this, they don't even address that. The fact that the father's 50 years old and the girl's 16 has 2 kids. Think about that. So she's 16, has 2 kids. One of them was at least 2, so that's 13.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I did not mean to go down this dark hole. The courts have reopened here in LA, and I've actually got a couple active cases, and one of them I have to work on a little bit today. So, and I was rereading some of that last night, and it made me a little sad. So. Do you have
to have any kind of background in law or any particular skills to be part?
No, you're not a lawyer. You're an advocate for a kid, and essentially what you're advocating for the kid is his educational rights and his housing. So that's it. So you're making sure the kid has a place to live, and you're making sure the kid has education of some sort. And it's tough because one of the kids I worked with, I don't work with anymore. He graduated high school with a really bad grade point average. And for me, valedictorian in my high school, I pushed my sons to get B's and A's, and B minus, I would be mad at them. This kid and his family members were ecstatic that he barely passed and graduated high school. And it was such a weird experience for me because I had to congratulate a guy. And it gets into that white privilege first world. There's a lot to unpack in all this, and I don't want to get into any of that. But it's interesting how I'm really happy that a lot of, the last couple of years have been really tough, and I've been really down on myself. But in a weird way, I'm kind of happy a lot of this stuff has happened because it's changed the way I think about things. And I'm not even necessarily talking about COVID and the pandemic and all these sort of things, but I think it's just important, to just try to do something, and it's hard sometimes, I think, especially, and again, I'm going to say one last thing on this, and I want to move on because I know this kind of stuff is controversial, but I have to tell you, if you want to, as a white person, actually experience racism, watch it through the eyes of your child. And because my children are not white.
Yep, I can see your heart. I can see your heart. It's okay.
I'm driving emotional.
Okay, you love them. You love them, and you've seen what they've had to go through. And I was thinking earlier about something about how we approach. We even as a comic book person, I've learned that I can't look at who walks in the front door and decide whether they're a comic book person or not because we all look so different that you can't judge it. We just need to apply that to everybody, that we cannot judge anybody by what they look like at all. Nothing about their appearance should inform us about what their heart is like.
Now, I remember the first time I ever saw Chuck Rosansky. I love Chuck, but the first time I saw this guy, long-haired, hippie-looking guy, red shoes, I'm like, what? And it was just because of my youth, how I was raised. It was a complete prejudice. And it's so interesting when you unpack that as an adult. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You need to get older and then realize how you at some point in your life that you were pretty dumb and naive, and it's nice to mature and figure things out.
Yeah, but no, and to clarify, I'm sorry I got emotional. It's been a crazy. We're all emotional right now, right? I mean, the world, pandemic, everything. I mean, I had a friend of mine die last week of COVID. It was not good, you know. So.
Yeah, we all, I think, together need a nice cry, honestly.
Yeah.
All right, I had a question that came up that I thought was a really good one. Yeah, the Tanner O'Neill question. What's your favorite Top Cow book not written by you?
Oh my gosh. You know, I'd have to say Sunstone, and this is not the book I would have said a decade ago, and it's because I have such a fondness in my heart for Stepan Sajic and his wife, and they've changed me and made me a much better writer in terms of how to write characters and people and interrelationships. And Sunstone is a book that I should not like. Well, not that I should not like, but 20 years ago I would never have looked at. I would not have liked it. And it is so quirky and cute and fun and kind of beautiful that I love it, you know. And I think it's a and you could tell it's a work of love. And one of the things I realized about some of these sex positive books and industries, in a way, like S&M or swinging or whatever you want to call it, these people that do these industries or that do these things as a lifestyle, they don't want to be shamed for it. You know what I mean? And one of the things I think we have tapped into with Sunstone and Swing, there are a lot of people that are very active in these communities that would love to have more entertainment to showcase and celebrate their lifestyle, which is what we try to do, versus 50 Shades of Grey, which is kind of rapey stuff. You know, if you talk to anyone actively in the S&M community, which I am not, but if you talk to any of them, they will tell you that they hated 50 Shades of Grey and they thought it was a really horrible reflection of their community and their values. And sorry, my neighbor is vacuuming. Can you hear that? I can put headphones on.
It's barely, you can barely hear it.
Let me shut my screen door. I'll be 2 seconds.
Yep.
There, shut the door. Sorry about that. But no, and I think there's so many. I mean, Witchblade, you know, was so far ahead of its time. I mean, Witchblade and Darkness, I think, were genius. And I wasn't at Top Cow when those were created, but Silvestri and those guys really tapped into something at the time because, you know, you had Marvel and DC, which owned the spandex set, and a lot of the Image comics were trying to do superheroes. And then Top Cow said, you know what? We tried this Cyberforce, codename Strikeforce stuff, and it worked for a while, but we're going to try this Witchblade, Darkness, Tomb Raider, Fathom, and we're going to go down this line of these other line of books. And they did it, and it worked beautifully, you know. And we suddenly had a supernatural universe, and the Witchblade TNT TV show was way ahead of its time. I mean, you know, there's so many series that came after that. But and I just saw Henry's. I don't know if you saw Henry popping up there. Hey Henry, how you doing, man? About the Witchblade and Darkness Kickstarters, and since Henry and Elena sort of take point on doing all the fulfillment for those things, I want to thank both of them. They do such a great job. I mean, the Kickstarters we've done, and I know you're a comic book retailer, so this may be not what you want to talk about.
No, it's totally fine.
Yeah, but I mean, the crowdfunding has changed things a little bit. You know, I mean, I don't know if we've done I think 11 of them.
I always think of Kickstarters as being a way to reach a different part of the market that when there would be people walking into the store. So
right.
They're usually a little more fancy forms of the books, usually hardcovers, a little more expensive. They give the customer a little bit something different. But I always see anytime anyone's picking up comic books, however they're picking them up, digital or otherwise, as keeping them in their lives. So that they still might walk into a comic book store and pick up a physical copy someday, even if they're picking it up for a friend to give as a gift. So anyway, comics get out there, I'm for it. So,
well, I think, you know, one of the things that's really revolutionized everything is webcomics. You know, I mean, there are so many webcomics and that are some that are so good. You know, I've discovered a lot. I go out and read them, and sometimes I'll see, this is pretty common in crowdfunding, where you'll see a crowdfunding for one of these things, like, and you go in and the underlying creator basically uses the tack, help me make my dream come true. And I actually do think this is a solid blueprint for people to be able to break into the industry now. I think it might be one of the few ways. You know, you develop a webcomic with friends, whatever it is, you publish it for free for 6 months to a year, you develop a small following, and then you you ask that following to help you launch a Kickstarter. And that then raises you to the next level. You have books that are in print. And I've found a couple creators that way that I wouldn't have otherwise been aware of, where I've seen a name for a successful Kickstarter and I'd never heard of them or the project. And then I almost always link it back to something on Line Webtoon or DeviantArt or wherever, you know. But I encourage, you know, if you want to be in comics, create comics. It's really that simple. You know, make them, publish them online. You know, I mean, we have this ability to publish things digitally, which we didn't have 25 years ago. You know, you can create and build an audience from scratch.
It's very true. I mean, it used to be very limiting too. Like when I published in the 90s, I had to self-fund, and that wasn't something that just anyone could do in the 90s, because you had to run 3,000 books. There wasn't a print house that would do it for less.
Right.
Even if you were using really inexpensive paper, it was a lot of money to throw out there. It was basically a really nice used car back then.
Well, so now pay for. I'm sorry to interrupt, but print on demand now actually is good. Mm-hmm. I mean, I actually was shocked. My sister for a while with her novels was doing that, where she published them through Kindle World, and was doing fairly well, building her own audience. But then she decided she went with someone who had a print on demand. She did it for one of her secondary things just to see what it would look like. But the quality, especially for prose, was pretty amazing. I've seen mixed results for comics because it's a little harder with the artwork and the color. But for prose, it's really easy to do print on demand now.
Absolutely. Yeah. It allows people to follow their dreams a lot earlier and not have to worry about the crush of, you know, going into it with a large debt. And it gives them something physical to hand to a publisher if they want to be considered. It certainly has to be a lot easier for you as a publisher to consider somebody that has a printed book than someone that hands you just, you know, 5 pages of.
Well, it makes all the difference in the world. And I'll tell you for a couple of reasons. One is if someone hands me a comic, in the back of my head, I might actually be entertained. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? I mean, at least if you're reading a comic, it doesn't feel quite as much work, and unless you get to the 3rd page and it's really bad, you know. So someone handing me a comic is much more likely to have it read than someone handing me a script, you know, because you know, reading scripts, there's so many, and I've published on social media at times tips about how to publish and how to pitch people and how to do that. And it's really hard. I mean, because the problem is for the most part, the people who actually take pitches, they don't really want to read them. They really don't want to read them from people that, because when you get a pitch from, say, I don't know, an established creator, you know their following, you know you're likely to sell X amount of books. They have a Twitter feed. You can sort of use these as metrics in a calculation to mitigate your risk when you launch a comic. I like this book, plus it has X writer, plus it has X artist, so we should make money. You know, I mean, all these things factor in, and people see that's the biggest thing people forget is that this is a business, mm-hmm. and they don't treat it as such. You know, and that's always been my biggest fear about our industry is there's just too many people in too many positions of power that were glorified fan people.
So how do you approach it? We've got about 3 more minutes. How do you approach when someone hands you a project? How soon is it like a simple enough thing that you just like, you know, within a couple of minutes, whether it's something that's for Top Cow or it's easy to pass?
I think a lot of that depends. We tend to not accept unsolicited submissions for the reason, mainly for legal reasons. You know, we do the Top Cow talent hunt, and we do it in a very specific and methodical way. You have to fill out a release. And the reason is because people pitch us stories, and often we'll get the same stories from different people, and there's no way they collaborated or knew anything about each other. Mm-hmm. And that's the weird thing is the zeitgeist, the Carl Jungian idea of the collective unconscious. You saw this Star Wars movie, you read this book, you saw this online meme, it gave you this core idea. That's why we have 5 different, you know, Bugs Life kind of films at the same time. That's why there's Asteroid in this. It's because there, for whatever reason, are multiple competing projects because there was something in the zeitgeist that brought it to the forefront.
Absolutely. All right, so I feel like we need like 5 more hours to really talk, and we'll have to do it again. But we have like 2 minutes. Tell everybody what they should be looking for from you in the future. What's coming out?
I'm working on a ton of different projects, several of which have not been announced. The one that I'm working on right now that is known is Swing Volume 4. Should be out in the fall. The Clock trade paperback just came out. I have 4 or 5 other projects I'm working on, and a couple of new science fiction things that I'm working on as well, but I'm not ready to announce them just yet. But we are excited about Witchblade and the new book we're working with on that. And you can see some of the art and some of the stuff that we've got for the Witchblade half for the Witchblade Kickstarter we just did for Volume 2. But I think there are a lot of opportunities right now because of all the chaos, and I hope, and I was talking to a friend of mine who said the biggest problem we're going to have more than anything is restaurants that, Mama June's Soul Food, which has been an icon for 30 years and the food is amazing, is going to get replaced by a Chili's. You know what I mean? You're going to see that in mass in this country in the next year, which makes me a little sad because a lot of the local mom and pop kind of establishments I think are going to be gone. A lot of them, I do know some predatory chain restaurants are doing this now, where they're going in and trying to either hostilely acquire or buy out a lot of individual locations based on their leases.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that.
They're half a month behind, so they talk to the leasing agent and say, hey, technically they're outside their lease.
Yeah, kick them out. I'll take the lease for 10 years and we'll put in a Chili's here. And, they have all the, if you kick them out, you can, and they haven't paid, you can. This happened to someone I know, actually, which is why I'm kind of incensed by it, especially in this pandemic world, as their assets were also frozen, meaning the restaurant was closed. And the chain that went in and bought it actually got all their equipment too. Shame
on them. That is horrible. Yuck. Well, we can look forward to all the positive, cool things that you're going to put out this year. I'm excited to see what's coming out, especially the sci-fi stuff, because that's what I dig about yours, because you always include some real science at the end, so I learn things. Yeah.
Well, Top Cow, the best way to catch me or Top Cow is just the Top Cow feeds on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Mine and Mark's Vestries are all attached to each of those, so you can find us. I'm Top Cow Matt on Twitter. We're fairly easy to find, and feel free to send us questions, anything you want to know.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time so much. And
no problem.
Thank you for sharing your heart with us today.
Okay. Take care. Have a great day, guys. Bye.